All right, everybody, welcome back to the Junto. I'm Noah Sawyer, and this is episode 47. And I just did a 2 hour drive, and I read an essay earlier today, so I figured I would do a really quick show before I have to go do a 3 hour drive. And yeah, so I'm just going to talk about this pamphlet that I picked up at a used bookstore recently for $1, and it caught my eye. It's just called Emotional Development and Spiritual Growth by Timothy J. Gannon, and it is, I don't know what the word for this, but it has those marks that the Nihil Obstat and the Imprimatur, their official declarations that a book or pamphlet is free of doctrinal or moral error and according to the Catholic Church. No implication is contained therein that those who have granted the Nihil Obstat and Imprimatur agree with the contents, opinions, or statements expressed. It's an essay from 1965. I didn't look up the author, and yeah, anyway, so it was a lot better than I thought it would be, because you can find like a million things that look like this, even a million of them on this subject matter, more or less, like psychology of religion or whatever it might be, in the ballpark. And I thought this was good because in about 20 pages, he tries to cover a really deep topic within 20 pages, which is the tension between and the differences between trying to develop emotionally and like reach emotional maturity, or develop in terms of your personality and become, in some language, some might say a fulfilled person or something like that, versus going on a spiritual path and reaching some form of spiritual maturity. And some people, depending on their worldview, would consider one to contain the other, or the other to contain the former. So it leaves a lot of room for interpretation, I guess. And I liked how he approached it. So he pretty much put personality development into this category of thinking in terms of emotional maturity and emotional development. And he defines emotions and talks about emotion in terms of, or he demonstrates that personality is so heavily tied into our emotional reactions. So I'm just going to share a few paragraphs from this, and maybe some of my thoughts on those paragraphs. But to start, he uses a definition of personality that I liked, and that is something I've tried to define myself. Well, I haven't tried rigorously to define it. I haven't tried to put it in a sentence, but I have thought about it, where I'm like, what really is personality? I don't know. And I did feel like I was getting a little bit closer to an answer when I reinterpreted a verse from the Tao Te Ching. I forget if it is from the 8th or 10th chapter, something like, carrying body and soul and embracing the one, can you avoid separation? Something like that. That was leading me to a rethinking of the concept of the soul in my new Catholic worldview. So I was thinking, back in the day, I would read that and think almost dualistically about it. Like, I knew there was a unity to achieve, but I felt like there was almost a dualism tearing body and soul apart from each other. And that's what you need to find a way to unify and embrace the one of those two. But then this statement came to mean to me that the soul has to carry the body and the mind, and it has to bring them forward and direct them and guide them, while embracing the one, which is the unity of God. So that I saw kind of reflected in this definition of personality, which is from Pope Pius XII. And he defined personality as the psychosomatic unity of man as governed and directed by the soul. So the psychosomatic, the psychological and the bodily, the unity of that. It's not two things. There's one personhood, and it is being governed and directed by the soul, and a primary or the primary means by which our personhood is guided and directed by our soul is our capacity for reason. So this author goes at length. Really, this is a bulk of the pamphlet, is to dismiss the notion that because reason has such primacy in our spiritual development, he dismisses the common notion that we have to repress our emotions or put them out of mind, which is, if you read a lot of spiritual teachers, it can come across that way. But this is a living doctrine and a living tradition, and we have learned a lot about psychological health and bodily health in the past 100 years. And a lot of what we have learned is not... A lot of what people think... a lot of what we think we have learned is useless, sure, but we have learned a lot of important things that we can integrate into our conception of the human person as a material and spiritual reality. So, anyway, but so that's part two, is he kind of is trying to reclaim the importance of emotions in terms of spiritual development, and I'll talk about that after this. But first of all, he uses a definition of emotion. So he uses this woman, Magda Arnold's definition. I think she wrote a book called Emotions and Personality or something like that. And this whole essay is from 1965. So her definition is, quote, an emotion is, quote, the felt tendency toward anything intuitively appraised as good, beneficial, or away from anything appraised as bad, harmful. This attraction or aversion is accompanied by a pattern of physiological changes organized toward approach or withdrawal, and these patterns differ for different emotions. So there's emphasis on the felt tendency, the subjective or affective state of emotion, and it's akin to desire, but it's more basic and primitive. It lacks the careful evaluation that underlies our most cherished desires. Like when we, these are, I took some notes from him, so some of that is his phrasing. If not all of it, but I'm not sure, I didn't put quotes. So there's, with desire, you know, with our most cherished desires, they are things we think about, and they're things we're a little bit practical about. We create steps in order to achieve those goals, and we can discern whether or not they might be rational or not, or like capable of achieving, or what do I need to change about myself in order to achieve this goal. But the emotional goal is it's a little more, primitive, I guess he says, basic and primitive. It's reactive, it's very sudden, and it is deep. And he says this feeling arises spontaneously or instinctively from the direct appraisal of the object or situation. It's a quick and non-analytic evaluation, similar to a pleasure or pain thing. But this isn't just about physical pleasure or physical pain. This could be, imagine trying to have a conversation with someone who is like really doesn't want to have a conversation about that thing. They're going to have an emotional reaction, and that will surface in different ways for different people. As we'll see, he has a really beautiful paragraph about how our emotional reactions are always demonstrating this telescoped continuum of our entire lives, going back to our childhood, in terms of how we are drawn and pushed away from things. So, and then he says the feeling immediately activates muscular and glandular response to move nearer or away from the object or situation. And that overt response, or those overt responses, will reinforce the feeling, and it telegraphs that reaction to anyone around more than language is even capable of doing. Like, these emotions that we have are older than language. These are things that are really ingrained in us to be picked up on and to put off in order that they be picked up on. And we are in kind of an increasingly, for lack of a better word, autistic society, like not medically autistic society necessarily, but in terms of our inability to pick up on emotions. And I think a lot of that is just built out of our relationship to technology and our relationship to our culture, where we are increasingly numb to how our perceptory apparatus could be really, really fine-tuned. We could pick up on lots of things in social situations. We could pick up on lots of things out in nature. Think of indigenous communities who could learn the properties of plants by just spending so much time around those plants and observing them. And we're capable of deep forms of perception and intuition. And those are all being repressed in the current culture that is taking over the globe and has a really strong foothold. So anyway, he also says it could be either instinct or learned, but it is spontaneous and intuitive, this emotional reaction. It could be instinctive, which he just says is more like characteristic of the species. A lot of us would react emotionally to different situations, whether it be a fear of heights or aggression from another person or from a wild animal. Like, there are emotions that arise that are more or less instinctive, characteristic of the species. And, or it could be learned. It could be learned in childhood, or it could be learned at various points in the life, but over the course of the lifetime. And say in childhood, it could be related to fear that the child experienced, or I don't know. A lot of it just comes down to a child's relation to the family and to the households that they were raised within. Anyway, the spontaneity and subjectivity gives these reactions their precious individuality and makes them authentic indices of personality. So that's how he ties this all into general personality development, is because this is all tied to our specific life in which we were learning all these ways to react, not learning them consciously necessarily, although our awareness and intellect does play a role in our emotional abilities and our emotional reactions. There is something, I like that phrase, the precious individuality, and it's an authentic index of personality. Like, it is particular to each of us. We all have our unique emotional reactions to the wide array of circumstances we could be finding ourselves within and things we could find ourselves reacting to. So I'll read a paragraph from that page. Okay. So it is this spontaneity and subjective character of emotional reactions that give them their precious individuality and make them authentic indices of personality. In every emotional reaction, the whole dynamic history of an individual is telescoped. In every strong emotional reaction, significant emotional habits developed during childhood stand revealed to anyone who has the patience and the insight to read them. And that's something you've probably seen at some point in your life, whether it was in an argument or during a breakup or during a fight or even just seeing someone withdraw. You can see the child in most adults at one time or another. And in some people, it's very apparent. If you get to know them, or maybe if you're familiar with, I don't know, it's a lot of things are telegraphed and people don't realize they're telegraphed. Like, we are saying a lot about who we are and how we became who we are all the time in all kinds of social scenarios, but it's common to not talk about it and to let it go by without acknowledgement. So, and I would, I think the author would agree with me that that's not a healthy cultural relationship to our emotional reactions. I think we should understand that these are things that are tied into our entire history, and we should be loving each other with those things and trying to help each other heal from any of those negative emotional reactions that we have that are holding us back or that are making relationships difficult for us. So, yeah, and that's kind of this whole part 2 of this pamphlet is he titles it something like A Positive Attitude Towards Man's Emotional Life, and he is trying to break off the rust that has corroded the machine a little bit, where some people came to overly prize emotional numbness or emotional repression in terms of their, or for the sake of their spiritual development, claiming that maybe even that is necessary. I mean, I've been skimming through a book from the 16th century called Unseen Warfare about spiritual warfare, and the author is really, I mean, he's basically like you know, the imagination's great, but we have to destroy it to be safe from the devil. And there are really great things in that chapter. There are relevant things in that chapter. And he's not saying destroy it, but he is saying, you know, remove it from all color, image, memory, sensation. And I think there is something that could be lost if that was taken too narrow-mindedly or too seriously or too doctrinally, whereas that is just one form of spirituality among many within the Catholic worldview. So I'll read a paragraph from this section, which he quotes from Roger Schutz, who is a distinguished non-Catholic writer on the spiritual life. He says, so here's that quote. But one licit generalization, and the first we must grasp, is that the whole person must be animated by the interior life, body, soul, and spirit. One cannot keep watch only over his thoughts or only over his body. Between the physical and the psychical, there is such an intimate connection, such a complete reciprocity, that a disturbance in one leads to a disturbance in the other. Mind and body are one. The basis of self-discipline lies in holding both open, susceptible to the action of God. The aim is to maintain the creature in communion with the Creator. I emphasize it that way because creator was a connection I didn't understand until recently. Only in the end, the rule of Jesus Christ, the only end, the rule of Jesus Christ over the whole person. So that's his quote, and this author follows it up with, man is a psychosomatic unit, as was used in that definition of personality, and any attempt at asceticism or spiritual advancement at the expense of this unity is doomed to failure. One might have hoped that the full acceptance of the incarnation and the pursuit of a thoroughly Christocentric spirituality would have eliminated all this, but such is far from the case. So what he's saying about the incarnation is within Catholicism, or, you know, I sometimes I want to say within Christianity, but it is, like, I consider it the true Christianity in a way, but I don't know how to talk about it in that way yet. So within Catholicism, there's a, like, Christ is God becoming man. And that is, the implications of that are total. And he was a full person. He was raised as a child. He lived every day of his life, 365 days a year, every year, for 30-something years, 31 years, I don't know. And so there's a lot that comes with that. And I haven't read all of the Gospels, but he shows emotion in the Gospels. He goes to Lazarus's tomb, who is a close friend of his, and he was close with the whole family, and he's around a bunch of people mourning Lazarus, and he then goes to the tomb and everyone's crying and he starts crying, and it's specifically, he's crying moved by just everything that's going on. It's an emotional passage demonstrating an emotional reality of God made man. So he's saying if your asceticism is denying the body, and the body is where our emotions take place, there's a it's all a unity. Like I'm not a dualist. I don't think it's there is a body and there's a soul, or there's a body and there's a mind. I think I'm one person and it's all one thing, and I have different means of approaching that and intellectually thinking about that. I can think of the mental aspects of myself. I can think of the physical ones, the emotional ones. I can think of different aspects of myself, but I really believe I am one person, one human soul, that my personhood revolves around and branches out from, and then is in a close connection with all of creation. But anyway, so it's doomed to failure because there's a bodily sickness that comes along with that form of repression or that form of destruction, destroying the emotions. So, and when I say this, it can really go in either direction. And you probably have been exposed to people on either side of this divide where, like, on the other side of the not spiritually ascetic, self-denying people, the opposite side is people who think what they feel is everything, and that all they need to do is feel, and that they can intuit everything, and that they can just trust their intuition no matter what. And I think you can really be led astray by your intuition. I think the intuitive capacity of the human everything needs to be healthy. It all needs to be well and well-tempered and well-matured and stress-tested and capable of dealing with the challenges of living in the 21st century, really in any century. And on that side, I tend to think of kind of some more hippie-type people who are a little more just totally free-feeling, and some of them are Christian, but their Christianity tends to be a little self-affirming in a way where at least it seems that way to me. And you can tell sometimes if you know someone well enough. And sometimes people believe God is speaking to them and telling them exactly what they want to hear, whether that be through things that are happening in their life, thoughts that they're having in their mind, or feelings that they're having. And so, yeah, it's just to say, I think he's very well advocating for a healthy middle ground between these things, where there's a reality to the human person, but reason does still have primacy. And it's not, again, I feel like it's a very healthy primacy. I don't think it's, by putting it at the top, there's an unhealthy hierarchy that descends upon the person and creates a neurotic or anxious personality. I think there's just we have the capacity to think things through. And I think that and I believe there's a path through which we can have a really robust and adaptive and proper and beautiful and loving capacity for reason that helps us through emotional challenges and all challenges of life. But ultimately, it is thought. It's a thought that takes into account our feelings. So no one wants to be in complete control of their feelings, because when maybe everything's been going so good for the past year or something, but maybe you wind up in a situation that is really difficult and traumatic and feels horrible. If you're just at the whim of your emotions, it can spiral really rapidly and be quite terrifying. So I don't know, we're a whole person, and just like we shouldn't disregard the emotions, we shouldn't disregard our logical faculties either. So the emotional sensitivity and unfailing empathy of Christ are remarked by all who know him. Even his emphatic reiteration of the first precept of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, quote, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart and thy whole soul and thy whole mind," unquote, might have saved Christian asceticism from contamination from the errors of pagan rationalism, but it did not. One wonders how some Christian writers on the spiritual life can reconcile themselves to the divine authorship of the Song of Songs, which is I guess it's the most sexual book in the Bible, basically. It's a love poem about, like, deep, loving intimacy between two people. And so, anyway, I'll move to the third section here. Although I will, on the note that I was just saying where reason is important, he says, theoretically, there's nothing wrong with the familiar dictum that control of the emotions by reason is a necessary condition for the development of the spiritual life. But practically, it suffers from condensation and oversimplification. The difficulty arises from the fact that there is no simple formula for the control of the emotions. It needs to be a very sensitive, personal, highly developed, and amazing capacity of the human being. It's not simply throwing everything out and closing the door. And yet, we do need that control over the emotions, lest the emotions be used against us, or like to harm us, to pull us away from that spiritual road that we are seeking. So part 3 of this little essay, this is the final section, is the problem of emotional maturation. So, to become emotionally mature. And I'll read a couple quotes from this, and then I'll probably head off. This one, I'll read a few more quotes than I was from the other one. So, despite the elaborate distinctions that make the literature on emotion somewhat confusing, man's affective life is reducible to two basic modes of reaction: positive or negative, approach or withdrawal. All descriptive terms used to describe emotion can be reduced to two broad categories: love and fear, or hate. Fear or hate. Love, the positive response to reality, leads to a progressive maturing and integrating of man's feelings and to genuine growth of personality. The negative responses of fear and hostility give rise to conflict, disintegration, and self-destructive drives. All this points to a single conclusion: emotional development, integration of personality, in a word, maturity, depends on how well we have learned the lesson of love. This is the simple, straightforward conclusion to which a mounting mass of psychological evidence points. It is a conclusion to which spiritual writers could wish only to say amen. Because it is so simple and because the alternative is so horrible, we have made the error of assuming that the child, growing up in a comfortable home, will automatically learn the lesson of love. Bitter experience has taught us that we cannot take this for granted, and depth psychologists have documented for us the unhappy consequences of our complacency. It is as simple as this: born to love and incapable of going on without love, still, man finds it easier to hate than to love. As a result, he suffers from loneliness, estrangement, and alienation. In becoming alienated from others, he has become a stranger to himself, a victim of self-infecting anxiety. He has lost contact with his authentic self and lives as a stranger in his own home. He fills his life with novelties, his home with gadgets, his ears with sound, and all the while his heart is an aching void, ruled over by the demands of a witch-like superego. And I've seen that many times in my life. You can see it in strangers, and you can see it in a lot of aggressive people. And that's not to say anything is wrong with those people. This book ends on a really beautiful note, which is, I wasn't going to jump ahead, but I'll probably read it again at the end, because this speaks to me about people who are really so hurt and were so hurt in childhood that they have serious psychological problems. And regardless of that, regardless of the circumstances, lots of people, pretty much all of us have psychological problems. There's no one that I know very well who has a family that did not mess them up more or less in one way or another, whether it was intentional or unintentional. And so this struggle speaks to all of us. And a friend of mine who's Christian was recently saying that she finds solace in the fact that so many families are fucked up in the Bible as well. Like, it really speaks to the human condition and how we, and it, if that wasn't the case in the Bible, I would almost wonder at this point in the 21st century, in our unique technological situation and how it has exacerbated everything, I would wonder to myself, well, did they know how bad it was really going to get and how bad anxiety was really going to get? Putting abuse in, or like taking abuse and, I don't know, like, and the trauma resulting from it and engorging that trauma with the effects of a techno civilization that is even more neurotic and anxiety inducing than anything that's really come before it, and more numbing and offers less options for healing. It's deeply loveless. Not that there were not loveless societies before, but this one is fast. This one is new. So it is, yeah, but the fact that that is there in the Bible, I find that comforting, because it makes the message of love from Christ all that much deeper. It really speaks to the healing of the deepest forms of family wounds and the deepest forms of societal wounds. And so, yeah. I mean, I will read that little paragraph, because when we're dealing with people who are, well, he actually just has more to say about this type of person. Like, we're in a society of like really fucked up individuals, and there's lots of like narcissistic traits and selfish traits and hateful traits that have become so normal in our culture that even in sort of deeply affected individuals or people with more or less personality disorders, which I don't say prescriptively, like I don't think that's like a literal thing, but I think it is a pattern we can use to understand people. And so that gets camouflaged. It's so easy to be sick for your entire life at this point. And that's what I think a lot of people are hoping to change in the near future as soon as we really can. So I'll just get to the end when I get there. Intellectualization is the enemy of both spiritual growth and of mental health, and for the same reason. It is a subtle and seemingly virtuous escape from the humbling reality of the body and its functions. But escape is not the less dangerous because it takes place under the guise of freeing the soul for contemplation. Growth in sanctity depends upon total commitment, on the free following of God's call. Depth psychology and psychiatric counseling more and more emphasize the fact that the emotionally immature person is lacking precisely in the capacity to accept and to follow this call freely. Instead, he operates under compulsions of various kinds and degrees. That decisions reached in this atmosphere of tension may be summarily repudiated by the subject at a later date should not surprise us too much, no matter how much we are saddened by the spectacle. It was the failure of directors and counselors to distinguish between free commitment and compulsive overdetermination of choice that sanctioned this self-deception in the first place and permitted it to reach such proportions that it paved the way for this personal tragedy. And that's something you see in people with those types of personality afflictions. It is operating from a place of fear, and hatred really is, I wonder if it's reducible to a type of fear. I don't know that hatred in and of itself is, I mean, maybe it's the fruit of fear. Maybe you can reach that point and then you actually develop into hatred, but I think its origins are in fear. And so when you're afraid, you have these reactions that can become compulsive or can be compulsive. And when that mixes with your intellect in increasingly complex scenarios as you develop into a person or have a family or any of these things, you can wind up doing things and not understanding why and denying them later, and all of this stuff that, like he says, is sad to see and a personal tragedy. So psychopathology and depth psychology in our day have revealed a new dimension of the human personality. In doing so, they have brought us face to face with a new depth of the great commandment, the profound and complete love of God discovered, felt, and lived out in the genuine love of neighbor. If it has taken our anguish over those who have made shipwreck of the spiritual life, or who have become disturbed, unhappy, and estranged from their fellow men, to teach us this great lesson of the true power of simple, unfeigned love for man, of love of man for his neighbor, let us accept the lesson with humility and gratitude. And I think he puts that very beautifully as well, because it's like there's nothing against anyone who is hurt in this way at all. And we are really called to love everybody, including our enemies, including people who would want to kill us. And yet people do continue to hurt other people. And even in that, everyone really needs love, and everyone really can be loved. And he says, we learn these lessons through these cases of, whether it be in a clinical way through research or whatever, or in a personal way, like someone like this and you've grown and you've seen them over the years and you witness this, what he calls a spiritual shipwreck and this unhappiness. It is, if that's the way that we learned this lesson, let's just accept the lesson with humility and gratitude, not with, it's so easy, not with pride, with anything but pride, basically, or thinking that you're better than that person or anything like that. So, man is a psychosomatic unit, and his spiritual growth cannot take place in a compartment walled off from his everyday occupations and concerns. There can be no spiritual growth without total commitment, and total commitment is not possible without the full functioning of man's positive emotions under the sobering, maturing, and purifying experience of love. A major message of this pamphlet is that love is the means to curing our emotional illnesses, basically, where we have these emotional reactions to things, and they're tied to this history of our life, and we need to love our way out of that, and in confidence and in trust of God, in trust of our situation here with respect to him, we can find a way forward where we don't need to be afraid and averse to various things. We can instead open our mind and shine more light on the situation, learn more about it without fear, with a confidence that we're not going to be hurt in exploring these things about ourselves, other people, and the situations that we find them in. No matter what has happened to the concept of love in our day, we must rescue it and restore it to its true meaning, for it is the one word without which the gospel story could never have been told. But love cannot take on its true meaning until we have scrapped our traditionally negative approaches to emotion and permit the positive feelings to externalize themselves. He ends with another quote here. One can only be totally Christian if the reality of love and of the communal essence of human nature are not unconsciously resented as hateful or repulsive. And that is a very deep statement to me. And because there is so much, like we all go through, I think we all go through this on some level, because that's how our fears can operate, where it's like true love is to do things that are unnatural to us, that have not been enculturated into us. It's so easy to make fun of someone or to spread gossip, and it's difficult to overcome that and change the direction of the conversation or change the direction of your relationship with another person. But really, that's what love calls us to do at every moment and in every interaction. And there can be an unconscious resentment of that as repulsive. There can be an unconscious repulsion or distaste or disdain even of some of the things love calls us to do. So one can only be totally Christian if the reality of love and of the communal essence of human nature are not unconsciously resented as hateful or repulsive. There is a communal nature to humanity, and it's not that we need to be extremely close to everybody, but there is something, at the end of the day, there is something extremely close between all of us. We are siblings in a way. We are all in a real and serious way. And that goes for all of creation, but it really goes for our human counterparts, alive and dead, who have been on this journey with us, and or before us or after us. And it's easy to push people away because you don't want to embrace or even acknowledge the depth of what that really means, that there is a communal nature to us. So, and here's that last paragraph I mentioned, which I find really significant. As we said at the outset, man's capacity to love reaches full maturity when he can look upon the twisted features of a fellow human being in pain and not turn away in fear or disgust, but catch a glimpse of the face of the suffering Christ and minister to him in all simplicity and tenderness. And that brings to mind to me just so many circumstances of my life and so much suffering that other people have endured. And it is I think that is it's a good metric. It's a good way of judging where you're trying to go and how close you are to getting there. So that's it. I mean, he didn't end on that quote, but I'm not going to read the whole thing, of course. Emotional development and spiritual growth, just this little essay from Timothy J. Gannon from 1965. Always take a look at these little pamphlets, because think about it. It's like, you say you write something and it winds up in a little pamphlet, and that's it. And it was just a short run. And, you know, like a short publication run, there's 100 copies out there somewhere. 50 years from now, maybe the person who you really hoped was going to read it is going to find it and is going to read it. So I'm sure this man is dead at this point. And there's but he wrote it for me. Not only for me, he wrote it for many people, but this did reach me and touch me, and I found it to be a beautiful essay. So it's always worth taking a look at stuff. But it doesn't mean it's all going to be good. So anyway, yeah, all right, well, I'm going to head to New York, and I'm going to record music, and then I'm going to come back at some point. I might sell books while I'm there. You can hit me up on Instagram or something. I mean, I just used a smartphone for the first time in a week, and it's disgusting, and I don't want to do it again. So, but anyway, that's a way to contact me. And, you know, if you're in New York, I would hang out or something, but I might be kind of busy this time. All right, well, you know, have a nice Friday, have a nice weekend, have a nice night, everybody. See you later.